the CSS related attributes and options, the box and the margins and styles. Yeah. So the box model, I explained how we can handle it. One simple example we saw. So what is a content box? What is padding box? And what is margin box? One example we have seen, right? So next, after understanding it, how to handle this. Next option in CSS, we need to understand about the display. So how the CSS display is handled. So we need to know about the CSS display. Yes. So after understanding the box model, another point is how we can handle display. Actually, two important points are there. Technically, later when you know about Bootstrap, you can do in another way also. So that means we can use in another technique also. So we initially, how it will work without any Bootstrap. So we will see that first. We will understand about that. So that means the main purpose of display is nothing but actually technically the display property, that right, the display CSS property, the display CSS property is used to configure the display style of any element. So display style of any element. So actually it is treated as block or inline, and the layout used with various options. So various options. So that means technically it can be any element, inline, flex, grid, etc. Sorry. Right, that is the main purpose actually. That means it is used to control the display property, display style of element. So actually, so display uses different types of attributes. So and display uses various keywords. So technically it uses various keywords. Syntactically, so we have some element, and the element can be defined with the display, and it has some value. So it can be defined with the display and some value. Usually the display values can be like block, display value like inline, display value like flow, display value like table, flex, grid. These are all so many options. So we can handle in various styles. So technically, for every style we have some options to maintain. The major values that we regularly use for display. So What are the options we use for display technically? Those we will see now. Actually, the attributes will be three, like we have inline. So we have a inline. So we have inline, and we have block, and we have grid. These are the three important display options available. And grid, right? Technically, inline, it will display the content beside. Block will display in new line, and grid will display the content in rows and columns, So technically we have three major options for display values. We have three options. So how we can manage them, we will see that, right? Usually, let's write in a tabular form so that it is easy for us, right? That means the display values. What are the commonly used display values? So we have three important values. So we have value and description. So display value, we can set it into three types. So we can configure the display values into three types. So one is we can set inline. So that means it will display content. So beside existing, that is what inline is. And we have block. Usually it will display content in new line. And we have a grid. So that means we have display as grid. So grid, it can display content in rows and columns. It can use grid for displaying in rows and columns. And display can also use an option called flex. And flex is it is cross browser compatible attribute. Usually use it for creating layouts. Like a float, creating layouts like a float position, like this, like float and positions and positions and floating, I will tell you. That means we have another option as display as none. So none means none. That means usually none is it hides the element from DOM hierarchy. It is used to hide the element from the DOM hierarchy. So the important options for display, we have this display inline, display block, display grid, and display flex. These are the options defined. Now, how this display will work and how to use them, we will see one example. So we will see one example for that, how we can use that. Usually, we have the attributes like inline. Technically, how to use that inline. There are so many others. Inline flex, inline grid, inline table. We can have display. Most commonly used we have display table also. So that means you can keep display as a table also. Important one we will see here, right? Table. That means it can have the display style like a table, like a table. Grid also rows and columns, but it will be looking like a table element, actually, element. So usually very less number of times we use table, we mostly go with the grids like options. And obviously display have options like initial. That means you know that it sets the property to its default value, and you have inherit. So inherits uh, from its parent element, inherits from its parent element. These are all general attributes. So usually we use for displaying. Technically now, how to work with the display styles means how we can configure the display style. So let's see one simple example how we can manage the display style. Usually to display the content side by side, to display the content one beside another, there must be content according to our requirement. That means depending on the situation we can configure. For example, let's take one simple point. Here we are using a simple screen for contents. I'm displaying the contents here. Let's go to the shopping. Okay, so here I'm adding a new HTML page. Yeah, display.html. So we are adding that here, right? Right. So now we are configuring this and we are designing it. Fine. Now usually we want the display style here. Let's create a simple doc type HTML and head and title as a display inline. I'm designing a form. In that we have div. So this is having a text box. So input type text is equal to text. So placeholder as username, just placeholder as username, and another div. So input type is equal to password, and placeholder is some password. So these are the options we defined. Username, right? Right. What? 1 second. This is a very silly thing, right? This you can try by yourself. That is, after all, nothing. Once you know how to use the effects, these are all very simple. You can handle. So you some Purnima, you sent us screen, right? That you can do by yourself if you learn it properly. I don't need to explain what you want. I will explain more than that. You can try such silly things by yourself. They are very simple, silly points. That's general screens that you can design without CSS also. If you know properly tables, I hope you have practiced tables well, right? So look, once we learn this, you can do anything. Those are all very small screens. We will do more than that. Once we see how to build, then we can do more than that. Right. Right. So first point is here we have another div, and here we kept a button like login, right? So login, right? We are defining the options like login. Now generally, so we are dealing with the screen here. The form contains information here like this. That means it contains the divs placed like this. Now usually we have username, password, and login. Now I'm setting a class for the form. So class for the form as so form. So form form login. Okay, that is the class for the form. And I'm using a style here, and I'm configuring a style here, style. And here we are using class form login. So the form login contains a lot of divs inside. And here I will keep an option like display. Display, I'm using inline. I'm using display inline. That means form login having the display inline. So we set inline. Okay, now important in that the display I am giving div as inline, the div as inline. The divs are there inside it, inline. Then you can see all side by side. That is inline. That means in the form, whatever the contents you have, we are keeping them side by side. So this is inline. That means in the FRM login, the divs which you kept here, all are divs, right? These divs are defined inline. So defined inline. So then they keep the content side by side, side by side. All the divs are placed side by side. Of course, you want some distance to maintain. Then obviously you can set margin. So margin left as some 30 pixels. Then margin will be increased further. So margin will be increased further. So you can define that. That's an optional one. Here, our intention is to understand what is inline. So how we can configure inline. So that is a simple one. So you have your contents, and your contents you want to display side by side. Then we are configuring that inline. Not only for this form, right? Not only for the form. So usually let me keep this form in a proper some other option. I will keep some other option here. So we have a div. Okay, that is. Now we have some other option or another div here, div. And in this, I'm keeping some ordered list and list item. And here I written like home and written like about and list item like contact. Usually these are home, about, and contact. So unordered list. So they are defined in this way. Now here in the style, I am writing unordered list item as a display inline, I kept display inline. You can keep them side by side. You can keep side by side. So that means the contents will be arranged side by side. So that is the approach how we can manage. So we can configure that items. Usually later several examples we will see. Our first point is to understand how we can use the concept of inline actually, how you can manage that inline. So this is a simple example and very simple thing. So we can display the contents inline. So this is an example for having the content inline. So this is inline display. And this is the inline display. So the options for inline display. We just designed a simple form and some ordered list or unordered list, and we are keeping the display side by side for them. So that makes the contents arrange side by side. That is inline options. If you keep the option like display as block, right? Then they will be in the output, they will be one below another. So by default, they have the block style. So they will be one below another. And we can configure this as inline. So one beside another. So we can configure inline and it will be displayed in this way. So block inline, so you can switch between. So it contains a new line. So it will display in a new line. And inline will be beside. Right. So here you can simply put an option, change here simple option is change display to block, You can change display to block. So to keep contents line by line. So that is what actually the concept of block and inline actually. Next, we have display grid. We have display as grid. So actually, grid display is used for handling the contents, arranging the information into rows and columns. Usually, grid display is for arranging the contents and displaying into rows and columns, usually. So how we can do that? First, I will give an example for that, how you can manage. All right. Technically, so let's see another option, that is display grid. So that is for grid. Usually, when you are using display grid, it requires some additional attributes. So here I will give that point that display grid, display as grid requires the following attributes. It requires the following attributes. What are the attributes required for display grid? Following attributes, additional following style attributes. What are the additional style attributes required for display as grid? Let's check them. Here, attribute and description. Okay, attribute and description. And let's see how we can manage that. Actually, the attributes that we have to manage the display style, we have a grid template. So we have a grid template. template columns. That is one important attribute. It defines the number of columns, columns in grid, in grid, in grid, and the column width that we generally configure by using this display. So this is used to tell how many columns you want in a grid and what should be the width. We can have grid space, grid gap actually. Grid gap is nothing but it defines the space between, columns, We have grid column, so we have grid column attribute. Grid column, it specifies in which column the content should display. It specifies in which column the content should display, right? And we have grid row, so we have grid rows, so grid row, yeah, we have grid row. It specifies in which row the content should display. We will see them. How to handle that we will see. Display grid requires this. So inline, this is one example. Better I will keep a screenshot for you so that snipping, yeah. So that means how it is going to display the content inline for us. So just a screenshot I will keep here for your understanding sake. So I will keep that, copy, and the content is going to display like this. So it is going to display the content in this way. Yeah, that is the output, how it comes, right? Now let's see how grid works, how we can manage and use grid. So few examples we will see working with that, right? Yeah. So let's design an example for understanding grid. So display grid.html. Okay, let's create a simple doc type HTML and head. So title as display grid. Okay, and in the body, so we will keep some contents. Usually, so how we manage the contents, how we can define the contents. So let's design one screen here. So technically, I'm adding some elements inside. I will keep a div. Okay. For this div class, I will give container. It is our own name actually. Later in CSS Bootstrap, you can learn predefined containers. Currently, this is our own container. Okay. In this, we have a header. So here we are defining some Amazon, so shopping online. That is the header. We have. And after the header, we are having some article. We are configuring article. In the article, I kept something like Amazon home. And I will keep some paragraphs of information. So under that, I will keep some paragraphs of information. Let's copy and paste some paragraphs here. I am copying some paragraphs and I am using the paragraphs here, copy and paste them here. Okay, so this is the one paragraph information here. And we have another paragraph information, two paragraphs of information present inside this article. We have an header. I will keep an heading. In that we say shopping categories. In the shopping categories, I will add unordered list. Unordered list will have list item like fashion. So like we have an option like electronics, and we have an option like footwear. These are the options we designed inside. Sitemap. Some sitemaps will be kept in the right header, or some other contact details we can keep there actually. Okay, this is the design we have. Let's initially run this and see. So we just kept normal everything. And you can see these are the options we have. These are the options we have. So we have the header, we have article, we have aside, we have footer, we have logo and contents displayed there. First step, what I'm doing is to keep an appearance here. So let's keep a style. In that, for body, I'm defining width as 90% width of browser. So it will get 90% width of browser. And max width. So these max widths, I will tell you in the next point we are discussing about them. Max means, so maximum width, it should not exceed 1000 pixels. So that means minimum width, how much, and maximum width. This I will tell you in the next level while working with flex, because there we will understand them. Now another option is margin. So I am defining margin. Margin we will give 2 EM, and we will set it to auto. 2 EM is nothing but, so whatever already content is there, because these are not absolute units, right? So these are inherited units. That means the margin will be kept according to the width of the body and the HTML. So auto will keep it to center actually. Keep it to center. And font size, I will say font, so 1 EM will relative to HTML main content, and we will put Arial. So that is the body appearance here we are having. You see some space is adjusted because 90% we defined, and margin we configured based on the element contents here. Okay, now for header and footer, we have header and footer. Directly we have header and footer. I am defining some border as 2 pixel, then solid and a dark cyan. That is the header and footer background. I will put some background color also, background color as light cyan. Later we are going to learn backgrounds, borders, points. We will discuss them, right? Attributes, we will see how to work with them usually. Now, next option here, after defining the header and footer, so we will keep text align as center, text align as center, okay? And border radius as 10 pixel. So then you can see header and footer will be in this way. You can see the header and footer in this way. So that is the header footer. At the top, we have that header Amazon shopping online. At the footer, we have this. That is option. Now important is the container contains the header, article, aside and everything. So container is the main block which contains all of them. All of these are present in container. So now what I will do is I will set the style for the container. So container, okay. This container should arrange all its contents like header, article, aside, footer, these divs, all it should arrange in a grid form. Then we will put display as a grid. Container should keep everything display as a grid. It is displayed as a grid form. So grid form. That means it will keep everything in a grid form. That is the grid form set. But no effect here. Why? Because when you define grid, how many columns the grid should occupy, means how many columns it should have, you have to tell. How many columns it should be, you have to tell the number of columns. So, and how much width, as I already given you, grid template columns, it defines so the number of columns you want in the grid and the column width also, how much width you want. So technically, so when we discussed about the fraction in the units, we have to know about that. That means the fraction is an unit. It is defined for grid containers. So the unit for grid is defined in FR. It is defined in FR. FR is actually so fraction. So in FR is a fraction actually. That means fraction indicates in how many frames it has to divide. Fraction indicates how many frames it should divide and how much percent every frame should be. We already learned about frames and it will decide the number of frames it should have. Technically, it will decide the number of frames it should have. So what we are doing here now is, so grid, we defined as grid, you need to tell how many fractions columns must be there. We have to use grid template columns. And here grid template columns, how many columns you want, how much width you want. I want 2 columns. Suppose I am writing in pixel, like one is 200 pixel and another one is some 800 pixel. So the 200 and 800 pixel columns grid you have, then you can see it will arrange like this. That means pixels. You can define in pixels, no problem. But usually grid columns. Currently we have 2 columns. Don't worry about how the content are arranged. So actually 2 columns arranged. One column is 200, another column is 800 pixels actually. So you can define that column width, you can define, but traditionally we use some fractions like, so one fraction out of 100, one fraction is left one, and three fractions is the next one. That means out of, so it will display in this way. We can configure in this way. That means actually columns, how many columns there can be? Usually the columns maximum you can define up to 12 columns we can display. So generally you can configure in pixels, or you can configure in fractions. FR is also used here. Technically fractions point is they will adjust. Actually fraction advantage is when I am resizing here. When I'm resizing here, it will adjust the content here. It will adjust the content here. It will fit and adjust the content. So more flexible they will be. More flexible they will be. Pixels cannot be more flexible. That's the reason we don't prefer pixels. How many columns usually a template can have? Actually, if you want to split, you can define. Actually, you may be thinking like, what happens if I give 4 fractions? That means it will have more width. So suppose we have 10 fractions and it will have more width. That means maximum generally 12 is the max actually, right? That means 10 fractions this one and 1 fraction is this one. Columns can be defined from 1 to 12. Fractions usually a fraction is defined from 1 to 12. So it is defined from 1 to 12. So how much you want to adjust, you need to keep that, right? So usually I will give that 1 fraction, and that is some 3 fractions like this. That will be fine. That means because I need to show this heading and everything there, then I need a little bit gap over. Okay, that means display grid requires how many columns you want to split. So how many columns you want to split? So you suppose I am defining here. So this is 1 fraction, 2 fractions, and 3 fractions. Like that we define 3 columns. You see 3 columns will come. For third, this is first column, this is second column, this is third column. Another example also I will show you how we can add. Like that you can add 12 columns maximum, right? So initially this is defined into 2 columns. Okay, 2 columns you have defined. Okay, now how much gap you want? So grid gap, I will give grid gap as some 20 pixel grid gap. That means the gap between the columns will be 20 pixels. So that keeps grid content separated. Okay, good, it looks good, but our content is not ready to fit into them actually. 2 columns are coming, fine, no problem, 2 columns are coming. But the point is, this is a header actually. Amazon online, this is header, shopping online, his header. This header, how many, in which row you want? That means the row, header must be in the first row. Okay. And in which, how many columns you want to adjust? So how many columns you want to adjust, right? You need to define that. That means in which row header should be. So here we defined header. That means we are writing header. Okay. When you arrange anything, here we have to tell header in which grid row it should be. In which grid row it should be. The grid row is 1. Header grid row is 1. That means in the grid, it will be at top position. Okay, that is fine. How many columns it should merge? You have to tell that. So from which column to which column it should be. So that means suppose I want from second to second column, second to third column. That means we have to define grid column. Grid column is nothing but grid column indicates from which column it should start. Header should start from second column till which column it has to get. So second to second I define like this. Now you can see it displays in this way, second to second. That means only that, but it should actually come from second up to end, then second to third, like this I defined, second to third. It is displaying like this. Okay, fine. So this is the option how you are configuring. That means a grid row is one, grid row is one, and a grid column is this. Okay, fine. So this is for a header. And we are defining another option is footer. So footer we are defining. Footer also, footer should be in a third row. That means grid row I define as 3. Footer will be in third row. Okay, footer is in the third row. And how many columns it should occupy? Same like header. So grid column, it should start with 2 and up to 3 it should be. 2 to 3. So I defined in this way. Okay, so that is header and footers. We just defined that, right? So because still content, rest of content is not arranged. So we will see. Okay, now we are configuring this. Now aside, we have aside. You see here we have aside. Aside and article is there. Where you want aside? So then in the styles, what we are doing, we are saying aside. Aside, I want to keep this aside in a grid row. So in the grid row, which row? So I want it in the second row. Okay, grid row is 2, fine. And aside must be in first column. That means grid column we define as 1. Grid column as 1. That will be aside. Okay, aside is kept there. Aside is kept here. Now, actually, this is article. Amazon home, that is article. This is aside. Aside is kept in second row. So this is first row. This is the first row, and this is the second row, and this is the third row. Copyright is at the third row. Okay, that means header is in row 1, footer is in row 3, aside is in row 2. Aside is in row 2. What about article? Article is also in row 3, grid row 3. Article is also in, it is in 2. That means beside this aside we will keep it. And in which column it should be? So grid column, in which column it should display? So it should display in the second column. Aside will be in the first column, article will be in the second column. So that's what we have defined. And you can see it will come in this way. Now looks better, little better. Still some more contents are there to arrange, right? So here I said shopping categories. Shopping categories. Okay, we are keeping in this way. Now see, so how many columns are there? I will split them and I will arrange them and I will show you here. Usually now this is aside and this is article. These two are in second row. And aside is in first column, article is in second column. All right, fine. Now, one more option I can give here for aside. So border right, 2 pixel. So dotted, and dark cyan. So like this I define. Right border will be like this. I just given a right border. We can keep a little bit of padding for the contents, so we can adjust some space. So padding right, so padding right is some 20 pixel, and right padding will be 20 pixel. 20 is too large, okay, 10 pixel, so that is also too large. So just I keep padding for some 2 pixel, so not much, so that it will be fine. Okay. So here we are keeping the contents here. So content. Now here, if I remove the padding, so it will be exactly on the border because this heading is lengthy. That is the reason. We need to adjust the column width a little bit, then it will be okay, fine. Right? Fine. So that keeps the heading so in the place. Now important is we have two options more to adjust here actually. The logo and the sitemap. These are the options here. So left header, this is left header. This is the right header actually. So left header and the right footer, how you want to arrange them. So for example, left header. So I am just using left header. Yeah, left header. In the left header should be on a grid row. It should be on grid row 1. And it should be on grid column. It should be on grid column 1. And just temporarily, I will give here as border. So 1 pixel solid and dark cyan. Okay. And I will put some text align to center and border radius as 5 pixel, something like this. So that is left header. So left header, and it will keep that logo here. You can keep some logo or some content here. And what about the footer? So footer I want here to display below. Then we need to define the option as left footer. Okay, left footer, so grid row. It should be in third row, and a grid column, and it should be in third column, first column, third row, first column, and other options are same. I'm copying that and I'm keeping them here, and you can see it will display with that. So grid left footer. This is left footer, and I will give as this is left footer, not right header. Left footer. Okay, left header, left footer. It will be in this way. We are keeping and arranging the content in this way. So we are keeping all the contents and displaying the contents in this way. So this is arranging the information into columns, And very important is this will keep your content correctly fit into the browser. Even I am changing the zoom levels, so the contents will not come out of their groove, right? They will be within that groove. They will not come out of that groove. So this is how we can manage the grids. Little bit looks complex until or unless you practice, or I explain one more example, right? Because here into how many columns you are dividing, which content in which column you want to place, in which row you want to place. Actually, here how many columns are there? Here 2 columns are there. How many rows are there? 3 rows are there. Then you have to decide in which row, in which column, from which column it should start, which column it should end. That means, for example, suppose here I just given here. So this is header. So if I say 2 to 2 and column 2 to 2, so then you can see it's no difference, no problem. So that means it starts with 2, ends with 2. We given an additional just because if later, so it's zoom levels are reduced or it fits onto any device, then additional columns added, then effect will not be proper. It's a, it will not, so it will be confusion for your initial levels. So no need to worry. What you should do, which column to start, which column to end. So it should start from 2 column, end at 2 column. In which row header should be? First row. In which row footer should be? Third row. How many columns? Same. Aside which row? It should be in second row. In which column? First column. And article should be in second row, same, but in second column. This will keep the content correctly. Header, it should be grid row 1 and column 1, because here we have 2 columns. This is column 1 and column 2. We can keep any content there. We can define any content. We can display any content there, right? I'm just keeping some options. So actually, the width depends on these fractions, how you define. Suppose this is two fractions of container, then it will be more width adjusted. More width will be adjusted. So that means here I defined one fraction, then it is less. Suppose I said 2 fractions, then it will be more width adjusted for that. You can add any number of columns, Now, with this option, you can get a clarity on how display grid works. Display grid requires template and columns. What we will do is, this is an example actually. Yeah, we will design one more example. That means we will take another website and we will see how the website is designed, and that we will try to implement with our grid options. We will see how we can correctly fit them and make them available, right? Then that we will see in our next session. Tomorrow we will see that, right? You should first practice this. So if you can practice this, then tomorrow I will explain one more example and I will give you some tasks now. Today, so once go through your example that we discussed in the class. Then tomorrow I will explain another example and I will give you some tasks now. You have to design them and show me. Now you can design different types, right? You can handle different options that we will see in tomorrow, right? You will learn everything, right? No need to hurry, right? How to set a background image, how to set a border image. Without learning that, you will not finish CSS. So no worry, just follow our order, that's enough. Okay, you will learn everything. You just follow